Hello. Welcome back. It's good to see you again. How are you feeling? Okay. So, today is our 19th therapy session. And today we are going to be building upon something we talked about last week. Now, if you'd like a reminder of that, you can watch that session here. It should pop up on the screen, but if you'd rather just continue, I can give you a brief reminder. Okay, now, before we do that, every week you keep a diary for me where you record how you've been feeling at the end of every day, and I think you also note down the thoughts that you feel have triggered those feelings, those emotions. So let's begin by taking a look at that. Is that it there? Can I take a look? Thank you. Okay. Let's have a look here. Okay. So I think this is good. You've been keeping it consistently. I can see that some days have been quite tough, but recording your thoughts and your feelings in this way, just doing that, can make quite a big difference. It can help us to begin the process of untangling ourselves, of unsticking ourselves. Recording our thoughts and feelings in this way puts us in a slightly different position in relation to them. So rather than being right in the middle of them, kind of slightly removed, we can step back a little bit, and often when we do that we can start to see things differently. Maybe options that we couldn't see before appear in the space that we create. So you're doing a good job here. Okay. Okay, so now, last week we talked about how we all, me as well, have a tendency to recreate familiar environments. So this is where there is a particular emotion that we are used to feeling as a result of our early experiences, where we were maybe repeatedly made to feel like that. So, just looking at your diary here to see how this applies to you. So it may be that you always just feel a little bit anxious, a little bit on edge, maybe a little bit on the outside of things. Just not quite good enough. And what you'll notice is that the situations that trigger these feelings kind of keep happening, and they happen when you look at it as a result of particular choices or decisions that you are making. And the consequences are relatively low level. So I'm just looking here at some examples that you've given. Always running a little bit late. I know that was one we talked about last week, wasn't it? You maybe overpromise and then forget things, which creates or stirs up that very familiar feeling of being a little on edge, not quite feeling good enough. Okay, so as I said, we are going to move this on a little bit today, because there is a step up from this place of recreating a familiar environment. So it's on the same continuum, similar, but a little higher up the ladder of consequences, shall we say. And you may have heard this term before. We call it a self-fulfilling prophecy. So this is where there is a specific thing that you worry about, and that specific thing keeps happening. When you look at the process, as before, it's because of the choices that you're making, and it might all happen quite gradually, it might quite be subtle, but when you look at it, it definitely is, if you can be honest with yourself, as a result of what you're doing, the choices that you're making, the decisions that you're making. So, looking here at your diary that you've been keeping, for some examples, I know that one of the things that you fear is being rejected by others. Yet, you often behave in a way that eventually makes people leave you. So you're maybe a little bit moody, a little bit critical, a little bit clingy, or behave in a slightly jealous way. Or you just make a few slightly unreasonable demands or requests. You fear failure. So you end up taking on far too much, more than a person can realistically achieve. And then this almost paralyzes you, and you procrastinate, and you don't even start these things. And they're a failure as a result of it. I think it's important to mention at this point that these decisions and choices that we make in these situations are not conscious decisions and choices. We're not sitting down and planning to trip ourselves up. They just, because of our early experiences, kind of become tangled up in our personality, and we do these things automatically. Doesn't mean we can't stop doing them, but I'll come to that. One more example, I think, because this is quite a common one. I think you might worry that people aren't going to like you, and then you take on the persona of what we call a people pleaser. And this type of person is so worried that people aren't going to like them, they try to anticipate what the other person needs or wants without actually listening to what that other person needs and wants, and they end up getting it wrong. It's quite frustrating to be in a relationship with somebody who doesn't listen, because they're kind of too caught up in trying to anticipate to get there first. Okay. There is a third step up on this ladder, and you might have heard this phrase as well. We refer to it as self-sabotage. Now, this is where you get in the way of yourself in a very obvious way, in a very consistent way, in a very immediate way, to the extent that other people will probably notice, but you may even notice. Let's have a look here. We've got some examples in the diary. So, rejection again. You don't reply when you're asked somewhere or to do something, or you don't turn up, and you offer no explanation or apology, because your anxiety and your shame drives you underground, and people stop asking. With failure, that fear of failure, you reach the point where you just don't put yourself forward anymore. So of course you can't succeed or achieve if you're not even putting yourself in the game. Worrying about not being liked by others. So you are paralysed by your anxiety, and you appear kind of cold or aloof, disinterested, and that makes it very, very difficult for people to make a connection with you. So you are then in the position where you don't really have any relationships, or fulfilling relationships anyway. Okay, so all of these behaviours, so recreating familiar environments, self-fulfilling prophecies, and self-sabotage, they're all ways of coping with self-doubt and or a fear of rejection. And the level that you're at, 1, 2 or 3, is usually an indication of the strength of your self-doubt, of your fear of rejection. But no matter where you are on the continuum, on the ladder, change is possible. It's definitely possible. But we have to work consistently and over a period of time, not years, but probably months. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, let's look at the first step in this process. So, begin by identifying which level you're operating at. So, recreating a familiar environment, self-fulfilling prophecy, or self-sabotage. And maybe in different situations, different people, you might operate at all 3 of those levels. Then I want you to write a list, and maybe you do this over the course of a week or so, maybe longer, of all the examples you can think of where you are doing these things. Then you want to monitor how often you're doing these things, and I did show you this last week. This is my favourite way of monitoring behaviours. It's a golf counter. It's got 2 players on here, so you can monitor 2 things at once. But simply carry it in your pocket, and every time you notice yourself making a choice or decision that takes you down this similar path, you click it, just like that. And then at the end of each day, you've got a little score that you can write down. So this recording, this monitoring is has a similar function to the diary that you're keeping of your emotions. It helps you to step back, to begin to think about yourself and what you do in a slightly different way. It starts that detangling process a little bit. Okay, so monitor for a few weeks, I think, or until you feel you've got a good picture of how much this is in your life. And as I said, it is in everybody's life, but it depends on the extent, I suppose, that it's in your life, which will determine whether or not you want to do something about it. Step 3. And we've talked a little bit about this before. We're driven by how we think about things. So the next part of change is to work out what is driving this behaviour. What's the fear? And it's likely to be one of 3 things. Is it a fear that relates to you? Your value, your worth? So is it a fear that you're not good enough? Is it a fear that relates to others? How they may judge or respond to you? Or is it a fear about the future, the consequences? Okay. So I guess using your examples here, that might be something about failing, not managing in some way, not reaching a particular standard. Okay then, 4th step. Take that fear, maybe write it down. So it's quite helpful to jot it down, make it nice and concrete so you can look at it in a more objective way rather than it buzzing around in your head where it's hard to get hold of. And then I want you to write 2 lists. This is something we've kind of done a little bit of before, if you can remember, but the first list is all of the evidence, however rational or irrational. Write it all down. All the evidence that supports this fear of whatever it is, not being good enough or being rejected. So it could be examples, past experiences, or it could just be a feeling, I just feel that this is the case. And then, second list. All of the evidence that contradicts your fear. So evidence that you're okay, and that most people, or even just some people, like you, or that you do succeed, you're doing alright. You might not be top of the class in everything, but most things work out reasonably okay. So you want to gather together as many little bits of evidence as you possibly can. Then, 5th step. Reread all of the evidence from these 2 lists. Carefully, slowly, there's no hurry here. Then try to put together an alternative thought, an alternative to your fear, the fear that is driving you down this familiar path. And then rehearse or rescript the episode. So if I was thinking this alternative thought, what decision would I have made in that situation? And what would the consequences have been? And then you just need to keep doing this. So you go down that familiar, or every time you go down that unhelpful familiar path, afterwards, whenever you can, you sit and you work through this exercise. Identify the fear, the evidence for and the evidence against, an alternative thought, and then rehearse an alternative scenario. So you're almost teaching yourself a different way of doing things. And then what you will find over time, and it's not enough to just do this once or twice, you've got to keep in mind that you've been doing it a particular way for decades, But over a period of time, a few months, if you rehearse alternative scenarios, you'll find that in the moment, at the decision point, you will start to become aware of the alternative path, and then you will begin to be able to take that and start feeling differently. This may sound like quite a lot of work, and there is some work involved, but there always is in change. Things that are important usually require work, but they are always worth the effort. So I'd like you to turn this idea over in your mind. That's always a good starting point. You don't need to feel that you have to rush straight out and start putting it into practice. Give yourself some time to think about it, review it, and then I think if you do, you'll find the motivation to give it a go. Okay. So I hope that was helpful. It was good to see you today, to spend time with you, and hopefully I will see you at the same time next week for another therapy session.